And that might be the difference between you staying up and pulling an all-nighter, and sometimes it may be too much too quickly just because they want to rank at the top. Hi, Sydney here. I'm currently a second-year analyst at a bulge bracket bank, and I wanted to share some of my reflections of what I've noticed in terms of the pros and cons and be very genuinely transparent about my experience in investment banking so far. I know a lot of people really want to break into this industry. They may not necessarily know exactly what it really entails. I think there's a lot of resources out there, but I want to share one from my personal experience. So just a bit of a disclaimer, this is just coming from me, and this may vary from person to person. A lot of it sometimes does have to do with your group or the bank that you're at, so it's really dependent on your experience. I want to specifically discuss my favorite parts about being in the investment banking industry. There are definitely a lot of perks of why people want to get into it, and a lot of that I will touch upon, as well as share some things that I didn't really know before I started. First one is exposure and the level of responsibility you have just even as a junior banker. In your role, you put together a lot of materials that tend to go to board members or C-suite executives of Fortune 500 companies, at least from a bulge bracket standpoint. Having this level of responsibility can be very daunting, but it's also very gratifying in the sense that you see the impact of your work. The analysis that you're doing, the pages that you're putting together, they end up being in the hands of people who are in need of the investment bank's advice in order to make these decisions. So you're also being on calls with all of these really important people, which is very exciting. This kind of brings me to my next point. The reason why I really wanted to get into this industry in the first place was having the opportunity to work on really big deals, very transformative deals that end up on like the Wall Street Journal or end up being announced and is something disruptive for the industry, or at least for the companies and the peer set involved. Being able to be behind the scenes, or just in general, just being in the know about what's going on in the industry and just seeing what else is in the pipeline. Kind of building off of that point, how much you're able to learn. That is one of the reasons why people choose to go into this industry in the first place. Is it's just a really great training program. Getting into investment banking as the first job right out of college, it really does set you up for a platform where you are trained very well, you learn very, very quickly, you learn a lot, and sometimes it may be too much too quickly. It's like drinking water from a fire hose. I guess what I'm trying to say is you get a lot of exposure to corporate finance. You get to see how companies interact with each other, how these banks are the middlemen and the liaison, how all these parties kind of come together and how they benefit from each other. Why is it a symbiotic relationship? Why are certain clients choosing certain banks versus other ones? Additionally, we're always looking at the markets, so you are always knowing what's going on in the world. You see how, for example, something like a presidency or something like a global pandemic really affects companies, really affects the economy from a market standpoint. So in addition to learning a lot about corporate finance, different financial instruments, like what you're doing on these deals and how all of these different parties really work together, you also learn a lot of other things, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Qualitatively, having to manage multiple different projects, multiple different work streams that have different deadlines and timelines. More often than not, a lot of these tend to overlap with each other. And it's really up to you and your team members to figure out what you should be prioritizing and what you should be working on. Prioritization is absolutely key, because a lot of times you might get multiple inbounds from, say, your seniors, your managing directors, but what are you actually going to work on first is really important. So managing the work streams, managing the project, and also managing the people. One of the biggest qualitative buckets is the people. You are spending probably 80 to 100 hours working with your team members. So it's really important to think about that before you really dive into this industry, or, think about what group you want to be in, because the people can really make or break your experience. Thus, not only is it important to manage your projects, manage the work streams, manage the deadlines, it's also equally, if not more important, to manage the people. Managing their expectations rather than meeting their set expectations. You'll realize sometimes a deadline set for you is not feasibly possible, and so how are you going to be able to communicate that? As an analyst, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, but learning how to manage people and trying to align yourself with the ones who are easiest to work with for you is especially important. Let's go broad and then go more narrow. When you're working in this industry, when you're working on a live deal, any projects that you have typically requires cross-functional teams. So not only is it going to be within your own group on your deal team, you're also going to be working with juniors and seniors from other teams as well. For example, if I'm working on an M&A live deal, it's not just going to be my group, but I'm going to be working with the M&A group. I'm probably going to be working with leverage finance if we're thinking about doing debt, or maybe we're talking about the equity capital markets team because you're thinking of doing IPO or a SPAC. I think that's one of my favorite parts, is just working across many different teams and coming together to make a really quality deliverable for the client. Because we're constantly working across multiple different teams, it makes it very important to maintain connections all across the entire bank, because you never know if you will need someone's help one day. And that might be the difference between you staying up and pulling an all-nighter to put together something that's already off the shelf on another team versus you being able to reach out and they automatically respond with exactly what you need. This has actually happened to me before. It was already very late. It was, I think, past midnight, and I needed a page from a different team. I was able to reach out to someone from a completely different group, wasn't even working on the project, but this was just a very generic page that even though he didn't have it, he knew of someone else who did. And because I had a good connection with him, he had a good connection with that person in San Francisco, I was able to get that page and avoid spending hours when it was already 1 a.m. putting together a page that already existed. And this was thanks to connections across the bank. So building off of the point about people, you're constantly being surrounded by very high caliber, high intelligent members. I mean, obviously there are always exceptions, but most of the people are just very driven, very self-motivated, and just really care about their career. Being surrounded by that people really drives you to do the same. I think there's like some quote that says like you're the equivalent of the 5 people you spend your time around with the most. I have found this to be true. Being around members of high caliber is very motivating for your own professional and personal development as well. When you see other people who have their priorities that are similarly aligned with yours, and you're all working towards the same goal, the same vision to offer value to a client, and just being surrounded by this ambition, this drive to do better and to be a part of these deals where this industry is always chasing after is really gratifying and something that I never really thought about before starting. A quote that I can describe this industry as is impatience with action and patience with results. What I mean by this is our seniors will always try to be staying in front of the client, being proactive, thinking of new creative ideas that could potentially be helpful to the client, even though there are no fees being generated. Just so one day when they decide to do a deal, if they decide to do a financing, or they decide that they want to acquire an asset or be acquired, and ultimately as a result of these actions, when they're thinking about what advisors they want, who they want to be able to help them execute this deal, maybe they will think of your senior, think of your bank first, and that's where the results happen. I hope that was clear and it makes sense why this specific quote applies to this industry. So kind of building off of that point, one aspect that I didn't really realize before I started is how great it is to be surrounded by people of all different ages. Compared to my friends who are maybe working at other companies, sometimes they'll say the culture of my company, I'm the only person of my age and everyone else is very seasoned and very much been in the professional industry for decades. And that leads to them being more lonely on the job or not having like a group of people who they can relate to. The great thing about investment banking is that you're surrounded by your analyst class or associate class when you first start, which means that you have many people who you can relate to. They're your same age. You can ask your silly questions when you first start because you're all starting at the same time. For me personally, this has helped me find mentors. Having someone who has a few years in investment banking and know kind of what it's like being a junior, being an analyst, has made it very easy to find people who are willing to take you under their wing, to give you guidance, to help you get put on cool projects, and I am very thankful for that. Additionally, we have people such as seniors who are managing directors who are a little bit further removed from the junior role. Say if you want to become a managing director one day, you can look up to them as an example of someone who you're trying to strive towards and what they're doing on a regular basis to be in front of clients, how they're able to win deals at the end of the day, what is their key differentiator amongst the other banks banks that makes clients choose them. It's really helpful to have and be able to see everyone's different perspective just because everyone has varying levels of experience and background. Finally, the obvious points of why people want to get into investment banking, and this is compensation as well as exit opportunities. Let's be real here, it is pretty rare when you're 22 or 23 to be making 6 figures a year right out of college. This is a very competitive industry and it is competitive in terms of pay as well. The opportunity to have some sort of meritocracy and have a fluctuating bonus based on your performance is enticing for a lot of people. You will have a base salary that is pretty standard across the street, and then based on how you rank and how you shake out amongst your class, you'll be compensated in a bonus amount that can range pretty heavily. Having this is what incentivizes people to work hard and really perform at their best because they want to rank at the top. And then exit opportunities. A lot of people, their end goal is to get into private equity or go to a hedge fund. Having investment banking on your resume does say a lot, and it does help people get into the jobs that they want to do in the future to become even more competitive, even more highly compensated. So this is just really a great stepping stone in terms of catapulting you maybe in the direction that you want. Even if you decide to pivot and do something completely different, I think having it on your resume, and as long as the company recruiting team understands it for wherever you're applying, I think there's a certain form of merit. Just say you worked as an investment banker, and just knowing that you have that work ethic, you already have that background, it shows a lot about that person's skills that they're able to bring. You'll already have some quantitative skills, and that you were probably the cream of the crop when you were recruited, because the percentage to get into investment banking is so low. So yeah, it's kind of more of like a signaling effect, even if you don't necessarily go into the typical exit opportunities that people discuss. I hope you enjoyed this personal account of what is enjoyable about investment banking, and I will follow up with one about the cons and not so great parts about the industry. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you next time.